In full disclosure, there's an old preacher story I've heard told a whole bunch of times, and I was going to tell it this morning because it's an interesting way to kind of set up our series here on what it means to really believe something. And there's a little voice in the back of my head now that kind of tells me almost every week, if you can tell them about it, you could just show them. And so rather than tell the story, I thought I would demonstrate the story for you this morning. So we're going to have a little bit of a science experiment this morning. I made for you today a pendulum. You know how the pendulum works? You've seen one of those? You go to the big science center, see them swing back and forth. Basic idea behind a pendulum is you take a weight, in this case just a couple pounds in the bucket, and you hang it directly vertical from a fixed point, right? And then you take the weight, the bottom of the pendulum here, you pull it back one direction, like so. And what's going to happen when I let go is gravity is going to pull the bucket back down to a vertical position. Okay? But it's going to pick up enough speed along the way that it's going to swing past vertical to the other side until there's enough gravitational pull to slow it down, stop it, and pull it back to the middle again. So it swings back and forth like this. Okay? Now you may not know this, but in a perfect system, if you could create an environment in which there was no wind resistance and no friction, you could swing that pendulum forever. Because the force being applied by gravity is the same both directions. Would never slow down, it would never stop, it would never hit the ladder. Okay, that's going to happen every time we do that, just because this is not a perfect system, okay? So every time I pull it back, it's going to hit the ladder after 5 or 6 swings. I've tried to fix it, that's the best we're going to get today. But because it's not a perfect system, because there is wind resistance, because there's mass involved in the string, because there's friction up here where the hook connects, what you notice is every time you pull it back, it never quite comes back as far as where you let it go from. So if I let it go from up here and then put my hand out, it won't make it back to my hand. Every swing's a little lower than the swing before it because friction and wind resistance are slowing down the swing. Make sense to everybody? So just out of curiosity, how many of you, upon seeing my demonstration, believe that that's how a pendulum works, that when you let go of it, it'll swing over and come back just a little bit lower than it did before? Show of hands who believes that to be true. Okay? Anybody believe it enough to put it to the test? Because I need a volunteer. You want to be a volunteer, Aiden? Come here, Aiden. I need you to have a seat right about there. We may have to move it. We'll see. Yep, can you back up just a little bit? Just a hair? Perfect. And I want you to lean forward, and I want you to hold that right there. When I say let go, you let go, and we know that it's not going to hit you in the nose, right? Because it's not going to come back that high. So you just sit there, don't move, and trust in the law of the pendulum, okay? All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. Oh, you moved! You want to try it again? All right, let's see if you can do it again without moving. Huh? Right on your nose, right on the tip. 3, 2, 1, go. The ladder was coming to get you. Good job that time. Everybody give Aiden a big round of applause. What Aiden just demonstrated for us without really knowing is that in life, there are these two forces that compete for control of our behavior. The one force is belief. I know this to be true. I can trust this to be true. The other force is fear, right? There comes a moment where I believe in the rule of the pendulum. I believe it's not going to come up back that high. And then there's that moment when the bucket's swinging right back at your nose where you're not sure that your belief is stronger than your fear, right? And both belief and fear, if we allow them, will control our behavior. They'll control the kind of person we become. And we're going to read a story together today in Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5, if you want to turn there. And Jesus, in the midst of this story, is going to tell us about the competing nature of faith and fear, about belief and fear. In fact, it's such a powerful analogy that you'll notice our sermon series as we lead up to Easter, that's what we're calling it. Don't be afraid, believe. Because those are the words that Jesus is going to speak today in our story in Mark chapter 5. And we're going to begin in verse 21, where we meet a gentleman by the name of Jairus. So this is Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse, I guess I have it on verse 22. One of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, and he kept begging him, "My little daughter is at death's door. Come and lay your hands on her so she can get well and live." And so Jesus went with him, and a large crowd was following and pressing against him. We're going to pause there because the story pauses there, and I just want to talk about what you're seeing in this moment. It tells us that Jairus was a synagogue leader. Okay, in those days, what that meant, or the ruler of the synagogue, is he was something like a modern day maybe elder in one of our churches. They were responsible for the building and facilities of the synagogue. They were responsible for making sure the services happened. If someone like Jesus, a traveling rabbi, were in town, they would invite them to come and speak at one of their services. They were in charge of lining up who read certain scriptures and led certain prayers during the service. They kind of handled the oversight or function of the church. And in most communities, each synagogue would have just one. Not a team of elders like we have now, but just one leader of the synagogue who was in charge of the oversight of essentially the worship of his town. Because the synagogue is where people went on a regular basis. Okay, they didn't go to the temple and travel there every single week for the Sabbath. They worshipped in their local synagogue most weeks. And so he's an influential, important man in his community. Very tight end, very connected. He's used to being the guy other people come to and ask for help. He's the guy when you don't understand something, you go seek advice from. He's the guy that when you're struggling with your faith, you go to and seek help. He's the guy that when your kid's sick, you go ask him to pray for your kid. Because he's an important leader in his community. And yet here we see him approach Jesus. And he doesn't approach Jesus like somebody important. He doesn't approach Jesus like he's an equal with Jesus. He approaches Jesus like a beggar. Did you read what it said about how he approached Jesus? That he came and he fell on his face before him? And that he was begging him to come and to heal his daughter? This is the sign, the act, the picture of a desperate man. A man that everyone else sees and like, that guy's got it together. That guy, he knows God, he's got faith, he knows what's going on, he knows the Bible, he's important. And here he comes to Jesus as a beggar. On his knees, "Jesus, please come heal my daughter. Please come heal my daughter. Jesus, I don't have anywhere else to go. Jesus, I'm desperate for you to come." And so Jesus agrees to go with him. Though Mark doesn't use this word in this particular story, typically the gospel writers will use the word compassion. That Jesus had compassion on him. He saw his hurt. He saw his anguish. He saw his desperation. And Jesus was moved to action to help this man. And so he begins to make the journey to Jairus' house to heal Jairus' daughter. Now, if you're looking at the text there in your Bible, you'll notice that there's kind of an interruption. One of Mark's favorite ways to tell a story is kind of the way us ADD people tell stories. You start through the story and then you stop halfway and tell a different story, and then you circle back and maybe get to the end of the first story you told. You know anybody tell stories like that? Yeah, I tell stories like that. It's like, oh, where is he going with this? Don't worry, I don't know where I'm going either. In fact, it's so common that it has a name in biblical interpretation. It's called the Markan sandwich, because he does this all the time. That he tells the first part of the story, that's a slice of bread, and then he inserts a really juicy, meaty story in the middle. And then he goes back and tells the end of the first story, and that's the top slice of bread. And there are about 8 of these in his 16 chapters. That's his favorite way to make a point. And so he does that because he thinks that by connecting these two stories in your mind, he's going to give you a fuller picture of the truth that he's trying to teach you. For our sake this morning, I think sometimes it's easier to put the 2 slices of bread together and read those together, and then come back and see how the lunch meat fits in the middle of the sandwich. So we're going to skip ahead for just a minute. And we're going to read the rest of the Jairus story. And then after we've done that, we're going to jump backwards and look at the story that he put in the middle of the Jairus story, okay? So we're going to pick up, we're going to continue reading here together. This is verse 35. While he was still speaking, this is Jesus. While Jesus was still speaking, people came from the synagogue leader's house, that's Jairus, came from Jairus' house and said, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" But when Jesus overheard what was said, he told the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, only believe." And he did not let anyone accompany him he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And he went in and said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." They started laughing at him. But he put them all outside. He took the child's father, mother, and those who were with him and entered the place where the child was. And then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years old, and at this they were utterly astounded. Of course they were utterly astounded, right? Of course that's the response to what just happened. I want to unpack just a couple of things here for you. The first is Jesus' statement. Don't be afraid, only believe. Often I find that faith and fear function as enemies of one another. We talked about this in our Wednesday night Bible study a couple of weeks ago. Let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say your fear is you have a fear of being rejected. A fear of not being accepted, not being good enough, no one caring about you. I'm going to end up alone. How could anyone love me? What that leads to in terms of practical, tangible actions is often compromise. You change who you are and what you value to try to fit in. You compromise your morals because you want to be accepted in a certain group. You dress a certain way, talk a certain way, pretend to be somebody you're not because you want people to like you. Sometimes it leads to bragging and prideful behavior because I have to impress these people. I have to promote everything I've ever accomplished. I have to tell everyone how great I am, how smart I am, how attractive I am, how good of a parent I am. I have to let everybody know how good I am because I'm afraid they won't like me if I don't. And so our fear of not being loved or accepted leads to behavior that is in direct opposition to what God has called us to live. Faith, on the other hand, says, I'm already loved. I'm already accepted. I don't have to impress anybody. For the creator of the universe put his image in me. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I don't need to impress a soul. And so I act differently when faith wins than when fear wins. And those two, they live in conflict with one another. Maybe your fear is not about being accepted. Maybe your fear is of the future, of the unknown. And listen, if you look at the way things are trending in our world, being afraid of the future is not completely irrational. Things don't look great at the moment. But we're afraid of what comes next. It often leads to selfish living. I've got to store up for myself. I've got to make sure that I have enough for whatever happens. I have to protect me and my family. I have to make sure that we are ready for whatever you think is coming. And it causes us often to live less generously than we should. Because what faith says is, no matter what happens next year, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, God is going to be in that moment, and God is going to take care of his people, because that's what God has done for thousands of years. And so I'm free to live as generously as I want to, knowing that I may not have everything I want, but I will have everything I need when that day comes, because God will take care of me as his child. Again, faith and fear live in conflict with one another. And so when Jesus looks at Jairus and he says, don't be afraid, only believe, he's telling him, pick one. Either be governed by fear or be governed by faith. Either believe that the one you came to, the one that you fell on your knees for and begged for help, is actually powerful enough to help you, or go away afraid that this whole story is over. But pick one, believe or fear. And he's encouraging him to pick faith. Don't be afraid, only believe. And so Jesus goes with him. And when he gets there, there's this great commotion of wailing and mourning, and fear is present everywhere. Why are they afraid? What is Jairus afraid of? The same thing you and I are afraid of when death shows up. The permanence of it, right? When you have a loved one who's sick, whether it's cancer or a heart attack or a surgery or whatever, there's always a part of your brain that is hope, no matter how bad it is. There's always a part of your brain that lives in hope, right? He's going to get better. She's going to get better. They're going to come up with a new treatment. This surgery is going to fix things. He's going to start breathing on his own again. They're going to be able to, whatever the case may be. And so you live in this world where you believe that no matter what happens, things will get better, that things will improve, that you'll be able to make it through. But when death comes, that hope's gone, right? We don't get better from death. We might get better from a heart attack. We might get better from cancer. We might get better from a liver that doesn't work. We don't get better from death. And so when death comes, fear enters the equation. Sorry, my microphone shut down on us. Fear enters the equation. Because when death comes, we know we can't fix anything. We'll never get to have dinner with them again. We'll never get to take our kid for a walk. We don't know how her mom's going to respond to this. Will our family ever feel right again? Will I ever have the same joy that I had when we were out walking through the field? That's where the fear comes from. And if you've lost someone that you love, you know that fear. What am I going to do when I can't call mom on the phone anymore? What am I going to do when I can't call dad on the phone anymore? What am I going to do when I don't have anybody to eat dinner with anymore? And so Jarius has that particular fear. That fear that, we'll try this. We'll see if I can do this and talk with my hands at the same time. Apparently my body pack keeps eating through batteries. That same fear, that's what Jarius is feeling. And what Jesus is saying to her in that moment is, to Jarius, don't let fear reign. You came to me. You asked me for help. You fell on your face and begged me to be the one to help you. Trust that even in death, I can come and help. That death might seem permanent. That death might seem like the end of hope. Death might seem like everything's all over. But in this moment, in this instance, it's not the end. Because when Jesus is in the room, death is not the final chapter. Because when Jesus is in the room, death doesn't have the final say. When Jesus is in the room, there's hope, even in the midst of that kind of grief. And one of the themes we're going to hammer the next couple of weeks as we talk about faith and belief and we approach Easter is that theme, because that's the whole point of Easter, right? It's one thing to help somebody get better from a cold or help somebody get better from an illness, but to look death in the face and say, you don't have any power here anymore. That's what Easter's all about. That we have hope even in the midst of death. And so Jesus looks at Jarius and says, don't be afraid. Don't think it's all over. Don't think hope has gone, because I'm here. And when I'm here, life triumphs over death.
People always ask me what it was like when I was dead. I think the better question is, how am I alive? The answer starts with this man named Jesus. The day I died, he told my father, don't worry, just believe. My father, a city leader, a well-respected man, he was crying, begging at the feet of Jesus. And Jesus says, just believe. Believe. Jesus started to come help. Then he got distracted by someone, and when he finally did arrive at our house, he told all the mourners I was just sleeping. Not dead, sleeping. They laughed at him. Everyone in the room laughed at him. Well, not everyone. My father, he believed that day. He believed Jesus. You see, before it all happened, I called him Father. But after that day, I called him Daddy. I found out what he was willing to do to have me back, what he was willing to give up to save me. My daddy threw off everything he was. A ruler, a proud man, an important member of society, to fall at the feet of the last hope for his little girl. My daddy, he would tell you that Jesus too threw off all he was, everything that belonged to him, and died like a criminal for our sakes. So that all of us could be brought back to life. That's how I am alive.
I told you I wanted to revisit the story in the middle, the sandwich story. So let's go ahead and take a look at that story that's tucked in between the Jarius account. So we're still in Mark 5, but we're going to jump backward to verse 25 and read the interrupting story. A woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years had endured much under many doctors. She had spent everything she had and was not helped at all. On the contrary, she became worse. Having heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his robe. For she said, "If I can just touch his robes, I'll be made well." Instantly her flow of blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was cured of her affliction. At once Jesus realized in himself that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my robes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing against you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" So Jesus was looking around to see who had done this. And then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came with fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. "Daughter," he said to her, "your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be free from your affliction." One of the things Mark does in these two stories is he highlights some similarities so that you know the stories go together. For example, the girl is 12 years old. The woman has been bleeding for 12 years, likely meaning she's been an adult for 12 years. That she started when she became an adult and it never went away. That's what's implied by the story. So you have a 12-year-old child and a 12-year-old adult. Both come to Jesus with immense desperation. Jairus' desperation is marked by falling on his face and begging Jesus. The woman's desperation is marked by how much money she spent trying to get other doctors to heal her and found no one to help her. For both Jairus and this woman, Jesus is the last resort. And Jairus comes and asks for help for his daughter. What is it that Jesus calls the woman when he speaks to her? My daughter. So there are all these similarities and connections designed to make you as the reader go, okay, these stories, they go together. But to really understand the power of why Mark put the two texts together, you have to look not at what is the same, but what is different. I told you Jairus was the ruler of the local synagogue. He is as much of an insider as you can possibly be without being a member of the priestly family. Okay? He's the guy everybody in town looks to for wisdom when it comes to following God. He's the one everybody in town looks to when it comes to things of religious matters. He's an important, respected leader of the local church. He is as much of an insider as you can be without being a Levite or a priest. But this woman, she's an outsider in every sense of the word. According to the Old Testament law, a woman who was bleeding in the way she was bleeding was ceremonially unclean, meaning she was not allowed to participate in the religious activities of the day. For 12 years, she had been unable to go to the synagogue where Jairus was the ruler. For 12 years, she'd been unable to go into the temple and participate in Passover and other festivities. For 12 years, get this, because her uncleanness was contagious. And if she touched someone, there's a chance that she would make them unclean too if they found out they'd been touched by her. There's a good chance that when Jesus is touched by her, when she reaches out and takes the hem of his robe, it's the first time she's touched another human being in 12 years. And what's remarkable is, with the insider of all insiders and the outsider of all outsiders, both come to Jesus with a desperate faith, and both leave restored and made whole. And at least part of what Mark is saying as he puts these two stories together is that the good news Jesus came to preach, the life that Jesus came to offer, the abundant life that he came to offer, it's not just available to the insiders. It's not just for those who know their Bible and have been in church their whole life and have it all figured out. It's also for the woman who's been an outcast for her entire adult life, who's never been accepted in the in crowd. It's for her too. That the commonality of coming to Jesus desperate for the life he has to offer, coming to Jesus in faith with belief, it brings wholeness regardless of your background. It brings wholeness regardless of where you come from. You see, the question that stands before us, and we're going to hit this several times over the next 3 weeks, is when you come to face the things of life, when you stand there and you hear about the life offered in Christ, the hope that is offered in him, do you live by fear? Do you live by faith? When the pendulum swings back, do you trust the law of the pendulum, or are you so afraid of getting hurt that you refuse to live by what you say you believe? Jarius chose faith. The woman who'd been leading for 12 years chose faith. What about you? What do you choose? When you face illness, when you face rejection, when you face failure, when you face loneliness, when you face shame, do you choose to trust in the things Jesus offers? Or do you choose to live by fear and fight for your own survival? We're going to end with an invitation song today that proclaims it is so sweet to trust in Jesus. It is so sweet, so refreshing, so peaceful to live by faith, to believe that Jesus is big enough to conquer whatever we face, whether it's a 12-year-old disease or a dead 12-year-old girl or whatever you're facing in your life right now, that Jesus is enough for that you can trust him, that you can believe in his promises of comfort and of hope and of joy and of forgiveness, and on we go. And you can choose to live by trust, or you can choose to go out and live by fear. I want to encourage you, if you don't yet have that kind of relationship with Jesus, to not continue living without him. Don't leave this place without having a conversation about what it means to build your life upon Jesus, to live trusting in him. I'll be sitting down here front while we sing. I'd love to talk with somebody. Feel free to come up and sit next to me. Grab me after church and we'll have a conversation. Leave a message on our Facebook feed. Send me a text message. Don't let another day go by living in fear. Don't be afraid. Only believe. Father, we come to this time to sing, to worship together once more. And we proclaim a trust in you. And we proclaim more than that it is a sweet way to live. That there is joy in living with trust in you. That there's a joy in leaning on your arms. That there's a joy in resting in you. So God, I pray for those of us who know you, who have placed our faith in you, do have a relationship with you. God, I pray that we would sing this as a prayer, that we would sing this as a reminder of what we know to be true, that it is sweet to trust in Jesus. And I pray for those who don't know you, for those who are still far from you, God, that this would be an opportunity for them to reach out, to not go another day living apart from you. Father, it is so sweet to trust in Jesus every single day. May we choose faith over fear. In your Son's name, amen.